Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's Read Tech webinar, Understand the Updates, the new FDA Drug Distribution Report. I'm Erin McDermott from Read Tech, and I'm happy to be here today to moderate the webinar. So before we get started today, I just want to point out some of the logistics that you can find on your screen right now. Most specifically, we want to mention that we will be accepting questions all throughout the presentation today, so no need to hold them until the end. You can simply type them right there in the chat box in your application, and come the end of the presentation, we will address those live, as many as we can, time permitting. And if we don't get to your question, we will be sure to have somebody from the Read Tech team follow up with you directly. So your presenters for today's webinar are Gary Sainer, Senior Manager of Information Solutions here at Read Tech, and also David Wilson, the Pharma Team Lead here at Read Tech as well. So for today's webinar, Gary and David are going to do a brief overview of the drug distribution report, as well as review the requirements and the timing. As you all know, I'm sure there have been some recent updates. We'll go through some preparation and submission solutions. And then probably the bulk of today's webinar will focus on reviewing some frequently asked questions that we've been getting from you all, as well as a live Q&A at the end. So with that, I will not keep anyone waiting any longer, and we'll hand it off to Gary Sainer.
All right, well, thank you, Erin. We want to work our way through the overview, first of all. And what we'll do is kind of put the highlights in place. This is a topic that we have visited a couple times in the past, so hopefully it's not brand new, so we're going to move rather quickly. But we have found that clients have a ton of questions, so we want to spend a good portion of the time today with FAQs and responding to some of those live questions. So first of all, I need to knock out one of our acronyms that we use, this drug distribution report, or this abbreviated name, I should say. The FDA's official name for this report, this drug distribution report, is quite lengthy. You see it there, reporting amount of listed drugs and biologic products, blah, 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 and it goes on and on. So I don't know of a widely accepted short name for that. Here at Read Tech, we've adopted this drug distribution report name, but there's other ones out there. It all means the same thing. And one other thing that I need to touch on here, there's some terms that cause some confusion. So very frequently, the FDA refers to this distribution term, meaning the supply of a drug product out into the marketplace. And actually have some definitions there from the Code of Federal Regulations. Commercial distribution means any distribution of that drug. And yet, when it comes to the drug report that we're talking about today, the FDA has two fields that they differentiate in the header, and they mean a little bit different. So be aware that there's this field referred to as quantity released. So that is intended to refer to those products that were released in the U.S. market. And then there is also in parallel this quantity distributed. So the FDA now assigns that particular field for products that are shipped to non-U.S. markets, so export products and so on. So don't be confused with those. When it comes to actually filling out the form and putting values into those fields, recognize they're slightly different. We'll talk more about that, by the way. But when we talk about drug distribution report, it really does mean this overall annual report that the FDA requires. And this all came about now triggered, well, previously triggered by the CARES Act, and that created this Section 510 in the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, and basically it gave this FDA the responsibility to collect information about drugs that were already listed and placed in the commercial marketplace. So let's quick touch on what is in scope and it's pretty much everything that is listed. So we're familiar with a lot. Well, we handle a lot of these uh, particular products and support listings, so these are pretty common. But there's nothing left off the list. So any particular drug that you have listed with the FDA is in scope by default. Now, there are a couple exceptions. The FDA did act on a provision for the biologic products. There's two products. One is this blood and blood component for transfusion, and the second biologic is the cell and gene therapy products. So they have actually been carved out by the FDA. And there's a similar type of report, a biologic lot distribution report that actually serves those particular products. So I think the FDA thought it was redundant to do the drug distribution report as well. The other thing I'll touch on real quickly is the FDA has established some business operations, a short list, not all the business operations, but you see the list there. Very frequently used would be the manufacturer and API manufacturer. If you do like a label or a pack or something, technically you're not on that list, but the FDA advises that you exercise some discretion here. If that's the final establishment that now places product out into the commercial marketplace and distributes those products, and that establishment only has a pack or a label business operation connected to it, then the FDA still wants to know about that product, and so you do your drug distribution report, and in this particular case, you identify the activity as a manufacturer, even though might only be registered for pack or label. So there's a couple little sections there, but that does trigger some problems. We'll touch about that. One of the very frequent questions that we receive is, what's the timing of all this? When do I have to do the report? When is it coming up for the next reporting period, and so on? And I don't see that right here. Oh, first let's talk about some of the requirements. I'm sorry. The requirements are regarding the structure of the data. That, and let's touch on that first, then we'll go over to the timing. The content that needs to be reported is the reporting year, and then for each reporting year, the particular registered establishment, and under each establishment, the business operations. Each business operation, there could be one to many NDC products, and then you need to report distributed quantities for each month. So I find this a little bit easier if you lay it out in a graphical presentation. So let's just quickly walk through this. Let's say you have an establishment, I don't know, in Atlanta, and it has a DUNS number, 123. At that particular site, let's make up this activity as a manufacturer, and you have this product of, well, you make pills, and it ends in this NDC product code 11-31. And you have a hierarchy, a packaging hierarchy, which is not uncommon at all. So you put 2 of those bottles in a box, and you might actually have a third layer, which you now place into commercial distribution. You market the case, and the case has 4 boxes in it. So each case with 4 boxes, and each box having 2 bottles, each case would have a total of 8 individual bottles that would be distributed. Now, when you have this architecture and need to report the quantities to the FDA in the drug distribution report, you need to identify and always include the outermost package. So in this case, the case would be the outermost package level. So you definitely report the quantity there. And the FDA also wants to know the innermost. So we had 8 bottles in a case. So if I were to make 10 cases and distribute them in February, let's say. So I'd have 10 cases reported and a total of 80 bottles reported in that particular record. Now notice two things. One, the intermediate level was skipped over. And secondly, the number of pills is not actually reported. So the outermost package level and the innermost package level that contains the product. The FDA can figure that out with other listing information and so on about how many pills and so on. Now there could be a scenario where you also, in parallel to marketing the case, you might also market the box. So the box would have its own record. It would be considered the outermost container, and you'd also report the bottle as the innermost. So it would be a separate record, and you have maybe some additional volume, just at the box level. And if we press this example a little bit further, the bottle itself might also be marketed on its own. So it would then create a third record. And in that particular example, the bottle would be considered the outermost, and no value there would be for the innermost. So hopefully you get the idea there, but you should always keep in mind, you definitely at a minimum have to fill the outermost quantity in. Now, we're talking about this establishment in Atlanta, and we have this one product, but you might also market another product with a different strength, maybe a little bit different formulation, but anyway, it's a new product. 222-20 is that NDC code, and you market that at the bottle level. So that would be considered the outermost, and you report whatever quantities by month. But you're not done yet. Let's say at Atlanta, you also have API manufacturer. You need to report at the drum level, and you could also have some relabeling going on at that particular site for a blister pack. And again, you report the quantities there. After you work all your way down through all these particular business operations and NDC numbers, you finally complete the Atlanta establishment site, and then you're ready to move over to the Philadelphia site, right? For example. So there's a lot of structure in getting this particular organization is a challenge. Not only finding the counts, but getting this structure in place. The good news is that after you do this the first year, you can reuse this structure. Things will not change too much. Obviously there will be some changes in your operation, but at least you can use it as a starting point. Now, once you have this figured out, you have the quantities in place. How do you actually submit the data? Most in the audience are familiar with the next-gen portal that is provided by the CDER, FDA, and you can manually enter these particular values and quantities, or you can upload something referred to as a comma separated values file, CSV file. And that allows you to do electronic uploads very quick. We've done a number of these, and it works very easily. It's a lot easier than, believe me, than manually typing in the values. So this is a representation of that CSV file. This happens to be a screenshot of a spreadsheet with that content. Now, if we were to show the CSV file, it would be formatting would look quite different. But for working with this data and collecting information, most likely you'll be working with this spreadsheet. And the header across the top shows the various fields. So we touched on, that hierarchy of the establishment DUNS number, the business operation NDC number, and so on. And there's a number of fields that need to be collected. We do have a couple comments after submitting a number of these. Make sure that your first column, which include that establishment number, is a text field. So by default, Excel spreadsheet is going to drop that any leading zeros, and that's going to provide erroneous data and cause problems when you submit the data. So just be aware you have that issue with the establishment. We've seen a number of companies confused with this business operation. It's a short list. You do have to pick the one that's most appropriate, and you can only submit one. So you might have your registration for the establishment 3 or 4 different type of business operations, but you do need to pick the one that's most appropriate for this particular NDC number at that site. And then with the column for the actual NDC numbers, obviously, hopefully there's a good master record of all this, and finding those NDC numbers, you can use some resources to collect that. Rita actually has some helps in being able to pull that list together. But not all your SBCs are going to be listed in Daily Med. So there are some manufacturer API SPLs and drug for further processing and so on that you would not find inside Daily Med. So just be aware that it's not a conclusive list if you do a quick search in Daily Med. And then I'll quickly mention some questions about the source NDC. If the particular operation was repack or relabel, meaning you bring in an original equipment manufacturer's product, and then you repack it, relabel it, and so on, and then you ship it out under your particular branding, that source NDC number that you purchase and pull in for processing needs to be identified here as well. But it's only for those repack and relabels. If you're doing the other business operations, such as a manufacturer or API manufacturer, this would not need to be filled in. One other comment real quickly here is the outermost quantity distributed outside the US, so non-US submissions. And there is a little benefit here for those manufacturers that hold a NDA, ANDA, or a BLA. You need to be reporting an annual report, and as part of that annual report, there's a distribution data that needs to be filled in for both US and export. So that's a grand total per year. And the good news is that if you submit this drug distribution report, you can use this as the alternative for that particular submission. So it just cuts down the amount of work that you need to put in place for the annual report. And then last little hint on this and comment on this particular file is the last column, market unknown. This is a special scenario where foreign establishments, so non-US establishments, if they have a particular count and they're not sure whether all of it is imported into the US or not, they would say yes. So it's infrequently used. By default, you can put no in there. Actually, you can also leave it blank. So now that we've talked about the report, let's go over some of the plans that you might have to put in place, and hopefully you've kind of walked through this scenario. If not, here's a couple steps along the way. You want to create an environment, meaning pull the right team members together. This will most likely fall on the regulatory shoulders, but guess what? It's a team effort. You're definitely going to have to, at some point in time, pull in operations to get those numbers. Those that do planning and so on. So it does require you to pull, cross-functional team together. And then the hierarchy. This is a real challenge, certainly the first couple of years as we get used to this report. Make sure that you properly reflect your portfolio, and then you're off to collecting the counts. So this is again where you need to fill in those particular values on a monthly basis for those particular granular NDCs at the inner pack level and also at a minimum the outer pack level. And then the steps along the way here, the fourth and final step is to actually build and submit that report. So there's a couple comments there to help you along the way. Now, as to the timing, this was a slide that I was looking for earlier. The timing was based on a reporting year. So for a particular reporting year, and this went kind of retroactive. So the FDA said that for the production in 2020, you'll need to pull those counts together and submit that information as of February 15th of this year. And then there's a second wave in the schedule, the reporting year of 2021, needs to be reported May. So this is coming up, May 16 of 2022. And then thereafter, so anything that you would distribute this year in 2022 would be reported the following year by February 15th. Now, the FDA pretty much at the last minute, a day before the February deadline, did come out and clarify that these are not hard required dates, but they're recommended dates. So keep that in mind, that these are not legally binding, but they're recommended. There is a draft guidance, obviously, that supports this, actually a couple of guidance documents. And we do expect at some point in time, hopefully soon, the draft guidance would become final, and then most likely we'll see some game plan as to what the FDA is going to do here. Now, to fit this particular drug distribution report on your annual calendar, it's pretty busy. So the regulatory calendar here has a lot of activity. We'll leave this for homework for you to go through and look at some of these particular reports that are due throughout the year. But it's really busy at the end of the year with all the establishment registrations and the final listings and the blanket no changes and so on. This particular event, this annual reporting, would be in the February timeframe, and then we do have this one anomaly this year where the drug distribution report has to be submitted for the 2021 reporting data. So it gets very busy. And while we're here, I'll just do a quick shout out to those that have REMS products, so the risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. That particular product or report needs to be using SPL for any new or changed REMS as of December of this year. So this is a particular requirement. Make sure you flag that on your calendar. And if you do have REMS, obviously you want to be in preparation so that you're able to build that SPL going forward. Now, I think what we want to do is quickly switch over to David. And David, can you talk about some of the issues that we have, some of the skills or issues that we've seen, and skills and services and tools that we offer? Because it turns out to be a pretty challenging task, certainly for everyone to understand it and then perform it the first time. So can you give us some guidance there about what we have learned?
Right, absolutely. And Gary, if you could kind of go back a slide real quick before we get into that. One of the things, I won't go into the kind of concepts you showed with the arrow of how to get there, right? But that creating that cross-functional team internally and understanding hierarchies, right? That is really a helpful starting point, right? We know now that it's not a hard, fast deadline quite yet, right? We have some time, it's recommended, but there's still many organizations that work with ReadTech and some that did this on their own to comply now, right? During this kind of, you can almost look at it as a voluntary stage. But now if you move to the next slide where you showed right here, that not necessarily this one, but the next one that showed the timeline. So Gary had mentioned earlier, this question mark for LDR, this is earmarked for organizations who have BLAs or vaccines. This might not be the exact timing for your BLAs or vaccines, but the electronic lot distribution report is typically submitted 2 times per year, and it's usually based on when your BLA was approved. That doesn't wipe away the DDR, right? Gary had mentioned earlier, there's really only 2 subsets of that biologics industry that have been given a waiver here, at least right now, right? And so they're essentially almost 2 different activities of reporting volumes or distribution data to the agency. The DDR is a little less, or sorry, I mean, when I say DDR, drug distribution report is a little less detailed than that of the electronic lot distribution reports for biologics. So the rest of industry, you can kind of rest assured, all right, we dodged a bullet there. But ultimately, really, it's really taking a look at all this data and what we've seen with the information. A lot of the details and information, as Gary mentioned earlier, are directly from the information that we manage in our electronic drug registration and listing processes. So you can kind of move forward now to where we're talking on the preparation and submission side. So what we've been working with our clients in it is really helping create that functional team, that cross-functional team that's helping gathering the data. What we saw as really the most successful of our clients are those that have the data management systems that really help them understand how or an easy way to pull the data and ensure that they can then quickly review where's this specific NDC code manufactured. What are the different business operations that are included in the supply chain of that product, and allowing a regulatory professional to then hone in on, okay, what is it FDA is really looking for here then? So really what we've been assisting with is, so here at ReadTech, a lot of our clients are utilizing the single source for drug products, which is a software tool that helps manage the electronic drug registration and listing process. It creates it's a validated application that creates a database that has all of the data elements for all your drug listings, which allows ReadTech to then query this database for you and build a report that allows our clients to then review and quickly respond to, okay, what is it that we have to represent here, right? What's the outermost packaging NDC or level? What's the innermost packaging level? And then from there, that report can be used to start filling in our monthly and annual quantities of each of the products. So, one of the main questions, Gary was touching on it earlier, and we'll get into really the frequently asked questions, but some of the main items we really saw was the relabel, repacker, label, pack, right? Those are different business operations, and that created some confusion. Is, well, we pack, we label, but there's the specific repack and relabel. So that specific and those specifics, actually FDA earlier this year also changed some of their validation for repacked and relabeled SPL files, where you can no longer just have repack and relabel in the establishment details. There has to be a manufacturer listed in there. So previously that wasn't always there, and so it's triggered a bit of a review of the data now, right? Organizations now have to review their drug listing files. They have to ensure everything's matching up properly, and then it's kind of a perfect scenario where you can now look at it, ensure your drug listings are correct, so that, and once you've done that, that allows you to then really look at this drug distribution reporting data and provide more, more complete data. Some of the data elements and specific to the drug distribution report, and as they relate to the electronic drug registration and label listing data. In how we've been assisting our clients is really in generating that information, right? Providing a more automated approach to this, so that way, instead of combing through each and every drug listing file, like Gary had mentioned earlier, DailyMed is a really good resource for some of this, but not every drug listing goes to DailyMed, right? So, or the FDA's NDC directory is a good resource, but not all of the information may necessarily be there. So with this type of application, we can then query the system on behalf of our clients to then help prepare the data, help validate that data, and then we can actually submit that information on your behalf, or much like we work on the electronic drug registration and listing side, you can submit it directly through to the FDA's NextGen portal, which Gary and I were actually talking in preparation to some of this. I couldn't imagine, if you got to the file limit, having to comb through thousands and thousands of lines, because just in our experience, right, Gary and I, we really dug into a lot of it, right? We worked on some of the submissions. I shadowed Gary as he was clicking through and getting data through, and there was random scenarios where, like, why is this triggering a validation error? And a lot of the times when looking through it, it raised some questions. It also raised some questions as to, well, if this is almost, you could think of it as somewhat of a manual process of reviewing within the NextGen portal and then pushing it through, it can be time consuming. So the more you can shave off at the beginning of the data gathering process really allows for then that review for quality review when submitting, right? And we really look at it as that the preparing of the file and the validation of the file starts with how we're assisting here, right? The information is being pulled directly from your valid drug listing data, and then a user is able to start gathering and reviewing the data from there to ensure whether it's and again, we can build parameters around it, right? Exclude delisted products from certain dates, only include active products in certain dates, and really allows you to hone in on what is it that was active in that time frame. So that way, when we submit our reports, it reflects what was on the market and what we either distributed or null zero values for what wasn't put into distribution in those times. So yeah, that's really the cleanest method in which we've been supporting our clients is, in the quickest to submission, I would say, is that gathering of the data directly from the ReadTech single source for drug products application. Now, so again, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, this particular slide, I think, kind of summarizes some of the offerings of, where we have been able to help. Do you want to highlight some of that, please?
Yeah, right. So like I mentioned, these first bullets here talk about building that baseline file from single source for drug products. We call it the raw data because while it is structured data from the XML, it's creating an Excel output that could then be reviewed and then easily converted into a CSV file. For organizations that aren't using single source, we're taking this as an opportunity to review single source to see if single source would be the right application for your organization. But we can also build a report using the ReadTech Navigator for drug labels. Again, a similar type of query that's then querying distributed products and data that would normally live in DailyMed, right? So that the Navigator for drug labels is an application that pulls in the data on a daily basis from DailyMed. So really helping in building that baseline file there as well, simplifying the process. And then the actual submission process, right? Like I had mentioned, it isn't as straightforward as one would think, right? We always like to suggest try to get dirty with the data, right? Get in there, plug and chug it if you can. But if it's one of those things where whether you are in a side of the industry where this isn't your primary role, right? You might be wearing many hats within your organization, and you rely on ReadTech as really your stewards of this information through to the FDA. We're here to support you with that. Or even we also look at the adverse side where you may be part of an organization that does have a large regulatory group, but it may be an activity that's just you have other more pressing and important items to work on, right? You validated the file, you ensured that it's correct through creating these outputs, and now you just want a ReadTech employee to ensure it's uploaded and then submitted properly, right? So we package it up, submit it, provide our clients with a confirmation receipt showing the data had been submitted properly and passed through. And then if we do see any errors, we communicate that, right? We start that line of communication to review what we're seeing, and then whether it be correcting or the other piece with the CEDAR NextGen portal is you are able to push data through even if it is not validating, right? I don't know if you'd call it a false error or maybe just not having visibility into what the exact validation is can be tricky because it isn't the same as a submission through the electronic submissions gateway to the office of the commissioner for drug listing, where if there's a validation error, you would get XML code back that told you what the error was, right? There's a little more digging, right? So Gary kind of put his Inspector Gadget hat on and dug in, and then we'd review, send a note to the client saying, okay, here's what we found, and really work on that data. So it's really from preparation to submission, and also being part of that cross-functional team within your organization to help with that.
All right, so I think maybe we'll move over to the FAQs. Thank you, David. That was a real good summary of some of the things that we've been experiencing these, last 4 months or so. Let's move into the FAQ section here. Aaron, I think you created a pretty long list of items. Why don't we work our way through that list?
Yes, absolutely. So what we really looked at was we've been getting tons of questions from you guys, since October, really, when this was released. So we literally went through and saw which ones were the most frequent, as well as the most relevant and pressing, and created this short list. So hopefully this addresses a lot of questions you all have. But also keep in mind, we do have live Q&A after this, so please continue entering questions in the chat box as well. But to kick us off, Gary and Dave, our first question is, we have a product that we have not manufactured for at least X number of years, which we are maintaining the licenses for. Do we need to report that there were 0 quantities distributed of this product?
I'll jump in and take this first one, David. The bottom line is that if you have a product that was active for any portion of a year, you need to submit the drug distribution report for that full year. And then obviously the quantities, this particular scenario, you'd set the quantities at 0 for those months that you did not distribute. Now this particular example sounds like it was not distributed for any month, so you'd have zeros all the way down for each of the 12 months. But the bottom line is determining whether or not the product was active. So that's the determining factor. If it was active, even if you did not distribute any actual physical product, you do need to submit the drug distribution report. Next one.
And I'll expand on that, Gary. This is a perfect example of why when a product is end of life and you no longer are supporting it, properly delisting the product will remove it from the FDA's visibility, not necessarily visibility, but it will remove it from the active list, right? So even products that did not get updated or did not get properly certified through the blanket no change certification do still live in kind of a limbo of activeness, if you will. I don't know if that's even proper grammar, but the idea and concept is they are in an excluded list of the FDA's NDC directory. So until you've delisted it, then it's wiped away. We no longer have to worry about it. So this initial round of in this first year of the drug distribution reporting, while it's not necessarily it's a suggested time frame, this is a really good time to take a look at your portfolio, take a look at what FDA's databases show, and ensure we're cleaning out those excluded listings, because that marketing end date you'll attach to that could then show, we ended this in 2019, was no longer active, therefore no longer needs to even be reported as part of DDR or drug distribution reporting.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So our next question, if a manufacturer submits info on the amounts distributed in the annual report, do they also have to submit this separate drug distribution report?
I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, Aaron, where we talked about those holders of NDAs, ANDAs and BLAs. They still need to report their monthly amount and tie it back to a particular establishment by way of the drug distribution report. So that would kind of be a redundant type of reporting, but the drug distribution report is much more granular. So unfortunately, that is the case. Now, the FDA does allow a provision here. So if you do submit the drug distribution report and you're in this position as a marketing authorization holder, you can use that as an alternative. So that submission can be used in place of the data distribution portion that you would normally include in your annual report. So the good news there is, you can cut back on the work of your annual report, but in place of that, you definitely still have to do the new drug distribution report.
Great. And I'm actually going to throw in an audience question that is tied right into that. which is in the annual report, do we need to refer the agency back to this drug distribution report?
I have not heard that you need to link it, but I believe it only makes sense if you leave it out. If you leave the data out, you need to say this drug distribution information was supplied in our, our drug distribution report. Obviously, you need to use the FDA's terms, the reporting, section 510K and so.
The 3-line title.
Yeah. And I keep forgetting what it is, but yeah. But anyway, definitely, I would suggest linking that back, at least making reference to it and saying, this was submitted elsewhere under different, submissions to the next gen portal.
Great. Okay, so the next frequently asked question is, should we report the total amount of product released or only the amount that was released for US use? Does the manufacturer report quantities exported?
David, I think you had a shot at this one.
Yeah. So, with the report, there is the ability to enter quantities or volumes for both. We heard a common question as well, we manufacture drugs for further processing, bulk product or APIs, and once it goes into distribution, we know that some of it's going outside of the US, but we don't know how much, right? There's also a field where you can either put a yes or a no that details if you know what those quantities are. So you're absolutely expected to put the known amounts for US distribution, but if it's an unknown value, you can trigger that, yes, this is unknown. But if you do know how much are then being set for distribution non-US, you are able to fill those fields into the report as well.
Great. And I think our next question is actually, maybe I should have phrased this a little bit different actually, but I think it's a similar question, just a little bit more granular about if things should be reported in totality or if we report just the US market versus the non-US market.
Yeah, I can see some confusion here because there's two different columns, this quantity released and this quantity distributed. And going back to one of the technical guidance document has some various scenarios, and they explain how to report what quantities where. So based on that information, it appears as though that the quantity release field should be the total amount that was shipped out of a particular establishment. So that, for like if you're in Atlanta, in our example before, you shipped the total of 2,000 units, you should report the 2,000 in the quantity released, and that 2,000 should include the 1,800 that was shipped into the U.S. area, as well as the 200 that might have been distributed to Europe, for example. And then in the separate column, the quantity distributed non-US, you would put and record the 200. So a total of 2,000 reported in the quantity released and 200 reported in the quantity distributed. That appears to be that's our understanding of how this particular guidance document is created and fleshed out. Maybe not the most intuitive way to do it, but that appears to be the way that they recommend reporting those quantities.
And to expand on that, if you're a manufacturer who's shipping bulk product and you ship it to different clients and then you don't know where the supply chain goes from there, again, that if you do know something's going out to confirm, it's the market unknown data element, where you can either add a yes or a no if the market it's unknown if this is going beyond the US. So if it's unclear to you, you would very likely use that quantity released and then market unknown as yes to show we don't quite know if it's all for US distribution or not. But then the idea and the concept would be the organizations that are receiving that bulk or API from there would also have their distribution reports that then clarify the volumes that they've then further packaged or further processed. So it It's kind of like a trickle of data all coming in that then comes together to form a more robust database with cross-referencing and so forth.
Great, thank you guys. For our next question, Gary, I think this may have been on the very first slide that you covered today, but I did want to still include it because this is quite possibly the #1 question that we're seeing come in, which is, are we reporting on the amount manufactured, released, or distributed per month?
Yeah, so there was a lot of confusion, Aaron, and perhaps there still is some. A lot of people thought this was like an inventory report. You know, how much did I manufacture, or how much is in my warehouse? And the concept, you know, probably stemmed from the intent of the FDA to understand what the capacity is of the U.S. and in particular drug products. You know, how would we react to a shortage? So, knowing what your manufacturing levels were and what inventories and so on, you know, kind of makes sense. But let's be clear, that is not what is reported here in this drug distribution report. You are not reporting how much you manufactured. You are only reporting how much you actually placed into commercial distribution. So what did you transfer outside your four walls? What did you actually ship and you know, and left your particular warehouse? So there is this breakdown. We had a couple questions just prior to breaking the amount that left the the shipping dock. Did it go to the U.S. or did it go outside the U.S.? But again, this is all shipped quantities. It's not manufactured quantities.
Great, great. I think that provides a lot of clarity for people. So that's awesome. This was another question that we saw quite a bit. Can a physician sample be excluded from the drug distribution report since they're not actually being sold?
Yeah, this is interesting. David, you have certainly come across a scenario where drug samples need to be listed with an NDC number, and there's actually an attribute to identify that particular NDC as being a sample. So the FDA's approach here is that this particular product is placed into commercial distribution. It is listed, and it's our understanding that you have to report DDR based on everything that we know. Did you have any other thoughts on that, David?
No, yeah, I agree with that. And again, it kind of goes back to some of the redundancies, right? There's also a drug sample distribution report. So the idea and concept of is, if there's a drug listing that includes NDC codes, you should be, from what we're interpreting now, right, the NDC code should be included. So back to the concept of the lot distribution reporting for biologics, things can change, right? FDA may determine when they go live with all this, we don't want this or we don't want that, and we're hoping that there will be clarity, crystal clarity on what that is. And so we'll continue to keep you updated on these things and these matters. But from like you mentioned, Gary, what we're reviewing and what we understand, this is how we're interpreting that. Yeah.
Yeah. And this report is much more detailed in that
right.
Sample distribution report. So we kind of saw the same thing with the annual report for those market authorization holders. This drug distribution report is so granular down to the month and ties the distribution back to a particular establishment site. So it much more granular than some of these other reports that we're talking about. So Aaron, I think we're ready for the next one.
Sure. Would you need to report quantity made for drug validation testing, specifically product that is made prior to distributing for commercial use?
So I'll take a quick stab at this one. Those drug products that stay within the confines of a corporation or a particular company, you might actually ship it from site to site. You have not yet placed it into commercial distribution. So this particular example of you're doing some testing at one site, and might be shipping it to another site for some analysis, that sort of thing. none of that has gone outside your control or your ownership into the commercial marketplace. So those would be excluded, in our opinion, from the drug distribution report.
Great. Okay, so would you need to list the establishment that product is registered under or the establishment that manufactures the product?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this one, Gary. So when drug listing, there will be multiple DUNS numbers or multiple organizations that are referenced, right? It could be the labeler, it could be the registrant, and then there's the establishment details. There could even be multiple manufacturing establishments. What the drug distribution report data is looking for is the manufacturer's establishment DUNS number, in specifically kind of the highest level of business operation, right? So in a drug listing, you may have manufacturer, you may have pack, label, various different business operations referenced. You're looking for in that scenario, manufacturer to be the business operation, and then the corresponding facility DUNS number for who's manufacturing that or performing that business operation. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we are the registrant, but do not manufacture, package, or label the product. We contract out. So should the contractors or the registrant be submitting this drug distribution report?
Aaron, this had to be like, if not the first, within the top 5 of your questions.
It definitely was. It definitely was. I saw PLD and CMO so many times my head was spinning.
Exactly. So this came up quite frequently, industry meetings and so on. But it's now pretty clear, particular drug distribution report responsibility models what is in place for a drug listing. So the contract manufacturer is the primary responsibility for reporting their particular quantities in this drug distribution report, as well as reporting the quantities for the private label distributor. So remember, there'll be 2 sets of NDC numbers, and you'll have to work your way down through that, and as a contract manufacturer, and figure that out, what you manufactured, and then what was actually distributed by the private label distributor. Now, one contract manufacturer might have multiple private label distributors. So their report for a particular NDC number, it would be the aggregation of all those particular volumes. And then each private label distributor would have their portion reported. And their distribution might be delayed. So if I, as a CMO, send out 100 products today, the private label distributor might keep those on the shelf and actually disperse those 100 3 months from now, or half of them, and then another 3 months go by, and then finally the 50 and 50 finally they become distributed. So there will be some different timing differences as you lay this information out on the schedule. Now, I will definitely be remiss if I don't mention that many times private label distributors do take the initiative. They want to be involved in this particular activity, and they actually go ahead and in some cases they are submitting the drug listing. So that needs to be in concert with the private label distributor or with the contract manufacturer. And we have seen a number of private label distributors take the same approach for this drug distribution report. They want to become involved, and as long as they coordinate and get the approval of this CMO to go ahead and do that, it works very fine. Just so that there's agreement between the 2 parties, the private label distributor can legally do that for the CMO on their behalf, so that's no problem. But we just recommend that both parties knows what the other's doing here. What the FDA obviously doesn't want is the private label distributor quantities reported twice, once by the private label distributor and again by the CMO. So keep that in mind. David, I think you bumped into this. You have some comments on that one?
Yeah, and Gary, a lot of times we'd love to be able to paint out every organization supply chain, but that would probably be multiple hour webinars. When we look at this in these scenarios where there are specific questions, if they're not being answered here, give us a ring, right? Reach out to us. We're happy to review your unique scenarios and really get to the bottom of, hey, how do we think this is? And I think when Gary presented earlier, the preparation, right, having that cross-functional team, like we mentioned, it's not always just people within your organization. It's, especially when you work with CMOs, the CMO PLD scenario, you want to ensure that you understand who's doing what, and also then if any of the responsibilities being passed on to you as a private label distributor, or even there could be scenarios where it's a manufacturer ships out and then another company's packing and labeling, right? So we've seen that happen as well. So there are various different scenarios, many different scenarios with different supply chain processes, and we're here to help try to make sense out of it and ultimately aid you in coming to a decision internally as to how you and your various partners will comply with these requirements. And again, it's still suggested. So you have time before it's required, which I think dovetails right into the next question here, right, Erin?
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any fines for either not filing or for filing errors?
Yeah, go with it, David.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, as of March 2022, and we're all talking right now, the drug distribution reporting document is still in draft guidance, and it's a suggested dates that we're looking at. So any potential fines or penalties are unknown at this moment. We have in the past with reports of these nature, we might typically see the agency reach out to say, hey, we saw some errors, and then allow some time to review that and correct it, right? Typically, that's what we see. Now, beyond that, if it's not been corrected, and then we're talking in a required state, final rule, this is now required. It's a work in progress. FDA's even stated that, and they are refining it, they are perfecting it. So right now, no fines or penalties that we know of yet.
Right. Very good.
Great. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our frequently asked questions. And I do realize that we're over the hour, but being that we lost a couple minutes in the middle, I was thinking I would take the liberty and maybe address about 3 of our live questions. For everyone else who had live questions, rest assured someone from Read Tech will follow up with you in the next few days and get you an answer. So the first question that we got quite a lot during the presentation was if we could just kind of boil down this content we just covered, are there any new updates other than timing that industry should be aware of?
Yeah, Aaron, by coincidence, just a couple of days ago, there was an update provided to the NextGen portal and some materials that support that particular site. So what I've seen is no change to the list of attributes, but the instructions surrounding that have been updated. They correct some grammar and put some additional clarification. The instructions now also have some discussion of the errors that could be generated when the NextGen portal reviews the documents. The portal itself changed a little bit. There is now a way to replace a particular previous submission there, so that's new, and there's also now ability to view a previous submission and look at the contents. There's some background processing that takes place when you upload a file, and it runs through and does these checks. And then brand new also is that you get an email from the NextGen portal saying, particular document report has been processed and gives the results and so on. So they did change the interface. Noteworthy is the fact the actual data elements have not changed. It's really just a matter of clarification in the way you do the submission. So that's interesting. Is there another question?
And I also believe part of that, Gary, was also the the volume that could be submitted in the each individual file, right? It went from around 10,000 lines to almost 20 times that, right? To 200,000 lines, I think.
Yeah, I neglected to mention that. You're absolutely right. So I think that was in response to the difficulty that a number of submitters had in fitting all their particular data. And with the row limitation, some of the large files had to be split apart, and just makes additional problems and confusion when you have part 1, 2, and 3 for a particular submission. So yeah, good point. Thanks for bringing that up, David.
Yeah, and thinking to that extent, we've assisted clients that had hundreds of NDC codes to report, which then expands each NDC code by 13 for each of the reporting periods. You have through the months and the annual total. That just seems scary to me, having to review that much information in the next gen portal. Because Gary, I shadowed you, watched you submitting some of these files, and it is. It's a lot to review, and so knowing now that the limit's 200,000, reviewing 200,000 files, just I wouldn't want to force that upon anyone, but hey, we're here to help you with it.
Right. Great. Well, that's a great summary. Thank you, guys. And we've talked quite a bit about exporters, but we've also gotten a few questions in during this presentation about importing. And specifically, does an importer need to report on the quantities that are being sent into the United States?
So yeah, there is certainly a requirement in place for like a non-US based manufacturing site. When that particular company imports products into the US, that volume needs to be identified in the report. Now, there is also accommodation in the event that particular establishment does not have the granular breakdown. Let's say they create, I don't know, 2,000 products in January, and they don't know the breakdown of what went to the US and what went to Europe, for example. If they do know the breakdown, then they can obviously, report the amount to the US, and let's say it's 500 of the 2,000 that were generated were sent to the US. They would report the of the 500 out of the total 2,000. In the event they don't have that detail, the instructions indicate that they should put their full amount that they distributed. So this would be 2,000, and actually that amount goes into the quantity released field. So they put the full 2,000 in the quantity released, but then at the same time, they need to address the market unknown flag. So, and set that to yes. So in this case, market was unknown. We don't know where all this particular product went to. So we set that to yes and put the total amount that was distributed. So that's the way that like a foreign manufacturer should address that particular product.
Right, and to expand on it, really the general rule of thumb we've been seeing with this is if you are a manufacturer or distributor where products are being imported into the US, if you're registering them with an NDC code in the electronic drug registration and listing process, that's the code then you're reporting on. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, guys. Right on to the next question. Don't want to waste any time. If a bulk API is manufactured in 2 different potencies, can they be combined into one drug product record, or do they require separate drug records within the drug distribution report?
You want to take that one, David?
Yes. So Gary, my understanding is if they're different potencies, they'd likely be different product NDC codes, right? NDC product codes. So in that scenario, then, with multiple NDC product codes, the FDA is expecting that you report each NDC code, the business operation, and then the quantities. So the answer to that would be each potency should have its own NDC code, and then the corresponding volumes for each corresponding potency or code.
Yeah. So
anything you'd add to that, Gary?
Yeah, I would just mention, so that would mean you'd have 2 records inside the report. And again, when I say a record, I'm actually referring to 13 rows, one for each of the 12 months, and then a total row. So you would, at a minimum, have 2 records, but it could be inside one report. So obviously connect those 2 records together and submit it at one actual file. So, Andrew, do you have another one?
Yep. Let's tackle, I think, one more. I know that we are over time, but and then again, just to mention, we will follow up with everyone directly who had questions. Especially, we had a lot of very specific questions to your different scenarios. So definitely look for some follow up from Reed Tech. But one more for today. Are we obligated to report the entirety of the drugs that we produce, both the drugs that are coming into both the drugs that are produced for the US and the drugs that are produced for global distribution?
Yeah, so if you are a marketing authorization holder and want to use the drug distribution report as the alternative data reporting in place of the annual report section, without a doubt, you have to include both the U.S. market and the foreign market, what you might export. So that's certainly a requirement there. And it's our understanding that this would also be applicable for those manufacturers other than the ones that are pursuing the marketing authorization exception. So there is dedicated fields. The FDA has this quantity released for indicating for what would be shipped into the U.S. market, and then a separate field quantity distributed for those particular products that are shipped outside the U.S. David, did you have any experience, talking to clients about that and how it fleshes out?
Other than the unique scenarios and a lot of confusion, I think you hit it on the head there, Gary. Based on what we understand, we are expecting more clarity from the agency on these topics, because industry has a lot of scenarios, a lot of complex supply chains, and we're hoping the intention of this and the purpose will help provide the details and clarity FDA is looking for. But I think that's part of why, the suggested date and saying, well, this is still in draft guidance, it's a suggested date. It's helpful, right? A lot of the organizations that we work with are trying to get the data in though now. And I think that's part of why they allow to replace data with the new update to the next gen portal, is if the interpretation someone may have taken based on this draft guidance is clarified and things change, you can now replace that data within the system. So they are making the functionality to make it flexible and allow industry to either, whether it be make corrections, but based on the interpretation and what you mentioned there, Gary, I think that's part of like a yes, if FDA is looking for that data, and that's why those data elements are there to allow you to clarify the quantities either that are for distribution in the States or outside of the States. And when we look at it, like there's a lot happening, right? There's a lot of manufacturing here in the US, and in the drug listing process covers the whole industry, while in human prescription drugs, animal health products, over-the-counter products, while other countries the e-drill process isn't the standard, right? They have different processes, and the different processes sometimes are more unique to human prescription drugs. So it's different, a little different here in the US. The FDA adopted the SPL XML standard years ago, so we're a bit ahead of the game there with how that data is submitted and having an understanding of that structured information. So hopefully we'll get more clarity. But like Gary mentioned, let's start putting a line in the sand to say let's include all that information. And if it's adjusted and changed, and if it's less, hey, let's update it to have less. If they ask for more, let's update it to have more. But that's really what we're looking at when we review with clients, is trying to help understand the interpretation of these and create a path forward so that you can comply when these are solid mandates opposed to suggested dates.
Great, very good.
Great. Well, Gary and David, thank you so much for your time today. I think you definitely provided a lot of clarity around the questions that we've been seeing come in from our customers. So great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you.
Move right ahead to the next slide. So if you do have any questions, specific or otherwise, about the webinar in general, please feel free to reach out either to your ReadTech account team or just to our general pharma team. You'll see the contact information here. We have pharma@readtech.com and then our telephone number as well. And as always, we do have plenty of resources on our Knowledge Center. So in just a few days, you'll be able to find this complete webinar along with a video breaking out just the FAQ section of this webinar that we think will be really useful for people. And we also have a webinar that we recorded, I believe, February 1st, where we really dive into the overview, the timing, and the requirements of the drug distribution report a little bit deeper. So if you're looking for some more foundational information, that's a great resource as well. So definitely be sure to check us out. And like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up with us. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. And once again, thank you so much, Gary and David.
Yeah, thank you.